we were discussing the Israeli deep state, but as I mentioned, I wanted to segue to the American deep state, because it has been apparent to any observer for a long time, essentially from the first day of the war. And of course, if one has been aware of events and has interpreted them correctly for many, many years, in fact, generations. But let's talk about since the beginning of this current war. It is obvious that the US State Department and all the various advisors who essentially set American policy, it's not Joe Biden, who's really out of the game. He's just along for the ride. The people,
whether he's dragged behind the car or not.
Yeah, that's not important.
Right.
He just has to continue breathing, and that's sufficient.
Well, I don't know if that's really. There's a movie, Weekend with Bernie, where there was a corpse that was basically made to look alive for a while. So at any rate,
I admit my ignorance on that score, but with regards to American policy, it's obvious that they actually view the barbaric Nazi atrocities, the kinds of atrocities that even the Nazis were not capable of, frankly. On Shmini Aseret, on the 7th of October, 2023, according to the Gregorian calendar, and the attack and the attempt to overrun Israel or parts of Israel, their response is basically to reward the perpetrators with what they refer to as a Palestinian state.
Correct.
Despite the fact there is no Palestinian people, but they wish to use this as leverage.
Correct.
Allow Israel's soldiers to spill their blood to get rid of Hamas, so that they can resurrect and resuscitate the idea of a Palestinian Authority state, or a PLO Fatah state, which is just
correct. It's more appropriate.
Which is just another branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, anyhow. For those familiar with the history, which we'll probably have to discuss on another occasion if we speak about Hajj Amin al-Husseini, Yamach Shemo, for example, etc., etc. So this, of course, raises the question. Now, everyone understands, every reasonable person understands, that any such state would inexorably lead to the demise of the state of Israel. And therefore, any reasonable person must ask themselves, are these people Israel's allies? And what is it, in fact, that they want? And what do they really think about Israel and the Jewish people? So what are your comments on that? Are we viewed as allies, enemies, or something in between?
I think the safest thing to say, I'm just writing down a few notes now, is that we're viewed as a liability, even by our closest of allies within the deep state. Let's go back to a minute to 1948. You have three institutions: the State Department, the CIA or intelligence community, and the military. And the State Department, which had a great well of anti-Semitism at the time, opposed the creation of the State of Israel largely on anti-Semitic grounds. And later, over the years, the anti-Semitism kind of camouflaged itself up to the present day with, wokeism, that Israel is a colonial apartheid state that really is the principal source of problems in the Middle East. You had the CIA, the second institution, and the intelligence community as a whole, that more or less viewed Israel as an outpost of communism. It was a misunderstanding of what Israeli socialism was all about, but they viewed Israel, primarily the creation of Israel, as a probable communist outpost in the Middle East. To this day,
it should be stated, to be fair, it should be stated that there certainly were in Israel. They were not a majority, but they were a not insignificant minority of the country. There were people who were dedicated communists. There was an entire kibbutz movement run by these people, known as the Shomer HaTzair, and some of them were more loyal to Stalin than they were to Ben-Gurion. They were more loyal to the USSR than they were to Israel.
Correct.
And they viewed themselves as outposts of communism. So, of course, I'm sure these various people in the American elites
Intelligence establishment
and deep state had other reasons for being wary of or even hating Israel, and they didn't need any extra convincing. But there was some basis to that.
Yeah.
To that,
well,
fear.
the communist threat for the agencies, especially the CIA, eventually morphed into the threat posed by Jewish nationalism. That's where they tried to drag me into this, where it's no longer that the Jews are communist sympathizers or members of the Communist Party, let's say the CPUSA or whatever, but we were Jewish nationalists, and we put the interests of Israel ahead of everybody else, including the United States. And in my case, at least, I kept arguing that I acted as an individual. I didn't act as a representative of any other organization. I had my own particular ideology, Jewish nationalist ideology, and I acted accordingly. And they tried very hard over 30 years to get me to implicate other Jews in this where there were none. So now this communist bogeyman has now metamorphosized, if you will, into the eternal Jew and the threat that a Jew poses to a country, their country of origin, because their loyalties are ultimately to their own people and their people's state, the state of Israel. The last one in 1948 was the military. And the military back then viewed Israel as a millstone around America's neck. And of course, there was an embargo immediately. Once Truman recognized the state of Israel, and by the way, I saw a facsimile of Truman's letter. And the first thing I saw was a line that was crossed out. And what was the line? The line was that he recognizes the state of the Jewish people. And it was crossed out to the state of Israel. And I thought his first thought was correct. It was very interesting. It was telling. And I think you could write a very interesting essay about that.
Our former so-called Chief Justice, Aharon Barak, who inculcated generations of moronic, robotic students of his with the idea that there should be no such thing as a Jewish state, but rather just a state of its citizens, Medinat kol ezrachea.
All its citizens.
He would have approved wholeheartedly of that
revision.
Exactly.
Right. So the military now views us also as a millstone around their neck because of their focus now on the Indo-Pacific. And to the extent that they have to share equipment and their strategic concerns with Israel, it diverts them from their principal mission, which is to contain China.
But this has been the case for at least 60 years.
Correct. And there are factions,
if not 75 years.
Correct. There are factions in Washington that are either in the ascendancy or barely treading water, I'll put it that way, at any given time. When I was operational in my intelligence work for Israel, I kept trying to tell my control officers, I am not working inside or within a friendly country. You don't understand this. I am working in a hostile country.
You're referring to the United States.
The United States. And this is why when they told me what my code name was, which was Danny Cohen, I asked them, where did you get that name? And I was told, well, we had an Ellie Cohen in Damascus, and we have a Danny Cohen now in Washington. And I immediately said, this is very bad karma. We all know what happened to Eli Cohen. What are you telling me? Because we were both, he was and I am now working in exceedingly hostile territory, lethal territory. And so we come to the present day. During my experiences in the Navy, there were two instances that brought into focus exactly what, in my case, the intelligence deep state, or the intelligence branch of the deep state, I'll put it that way, thought about Israel. One of my first assignments as a junior intelligence officer was to blindly pick a case study, while my colleagues picked others, to do a review of the existing intelligence back then and subsequent to that time, and do an analysis. So what did I pick? I had the misfortune of picking the Liberty incident, which was an incident that happened during 1967 when a U.S. intelligence collection ship, a modified merchant ship, big one, that was loaded with National Security Agency and military intelligence type people eavesdropping on the battlefields of the Six-Day War. And they were warned off by Israel because they were getting way too close to the battlefield. And there was an Egyptian attack transport that looked almost exactly like the Liberty. You could mistake them very easily. And unfortunately, by a series of horrible errors, the Liberty was attacked on the suspicion that it was this Egyptian boat flying a false flag. And tragically, well over 30, maybe close to 40 American service members were killed. There were a lot injured. The ship was almost sunk. It was a miracle that the airplanes in our torpedo boats pulled off in the last moment, or they would have sunk it, and it would have been tragic. And Israel paid compensation to the victims. There's a myth that went around that said it was a deliberate attack for various reasons, which I won't get into. So I looked at the evidence, both past and current, because these incidents are always being updated by new information. And it was clear that it was an accident. There's no question about it. And when I reported this, my commanding officer looked at me, and this is what he said: "Whose side are you on?" And I looked at him and I said, as an intelligence officer, I'm on the side of truth, wherever that takes me. And he said, okay, I got my eye on you. And that was a wake-up call for me. Keep your mouth shut. Don't let anybody know you're Jewish, which no one did. And the second thing that happened was, during the course of my Israeli intelligence operation, a question was put to me about a certain facility in Iraq that posed an existential threat to Israel. And the question was whether it existed or not. And I said, well, why are you asking me this? And they said, well, we're sending a team to talk to the Pentagon about this place, and we'd like you to kind of see what you can find so we can compare the evidence, so to speak. So in walked one day the team from the Pentagon, the official team, and they said, no, we've been given assurances, full assurances, that no such facility exists, and we should just relax. And I let them into the adjoining room, and there on the floor, almost the entire floor was covered with a photographic mosaic of the plant, the facility, that they had just been told didn't exist. And it definitely posed an existential threat to Israel. So one of the intelligence officers...
Okay, I'm sorry, go on.
So one of the intelligence officers looked at me and said, you know, Yonatan, it's sometimes better to deal with reliable enemies than unreliable allies. And everybody in that room just kept looking at this huge mosaic
This
of a
was
facility.
an Israeli intelligence officer said this.
Yes, all Israeli intelligence officers. So it's been known for many years that the Americans lie, deceive, mislead, misdirect us. Of course, the most damaging moment or evidence of this was the 73 war, where they, for quite a while, assured us that no such war was going to happen. Bruce Brill, for example, has written quite a bit about this, when in fact they knew full well war was coming. Why? Because Kissinger helped put it together. And when war was a certain eventuality, as Churchill would put it, he threatened Israel by saying, if you go first, there'll be no support from us ever. You know, you're on your own. And so Golda Meir made one of the worst decisions of her life, where she basically made the Air Force stand down and not launch a preemptive strike on Egypt and Syria. So the notion of, you know, the British have this notion of perfidious Albion. Well, we have another one. It's perfidious America. The Americans can simply not be trusted to do anything honestly with regard to Israel, ever. And when the truth comes out about this war, I'm not entirely sure that they'll be blameless as well. I'm not sure about that. And the fact that I'm not sure speaks volumes. Absolutely. Just as as I have a feeling there was a betrayal, a stab in the back, a dolchstos by leftists within the intelligence and community and the military community in this country. I have an equal feeling, equally strong sense or feeling, maybe even fear, that the Americans knew something and just decided not to tell us about it.
First of all, that's definitely possible. In fact, one could even say likely, due to the immense intelligence capabilities of the United States.